Okay, you hit a bug. That's pretty annoying. And you're left wondering, how did this bug escape development? Why didn't they fix it? Why didn't they do something about this experience that I'm having? Whether it be a crash, whether it be a broken plot, maybe it's just a bit of missing polish. Your first instinct is that they missed it, that the QA didn't find the bug. And certainly this can happen. There are certainly bugs that are very difficult to uncover during the testing process, especially things that require very particular hardware setups or are very much in the edge cases of complicated systems. One of the reasons why AAA publishers have giant compatibility labs is to test all of these weird combinations of hardware setups. On Dragon Age Inquisition, there was a bug that caused the game to crash if you were using a PS2 keyboard. For those of you who don't know, I don't mean this kind of PS2, I mean this kind of PS2. Without a big compatibility lab, that basically would be impossible to test. But even still, it's basically impossible to test all possible hardware configurations. And the weirder your hardware configuration, the more likely there's going to be something that's wrong that wasn't caught by testing. If you have a super slow hard drive and a super fast video card, this could cause very odd timing that could result in behavior that wasn't caught during testing. Similarly, with games with very complicated progression systems, like a lot of those live services, like a lot of the looter shooters, it can be difficult to find the places where the progression breaks down, places where there are exploits available. QA will find some of them, but they're not going to find all of them. If you give them good tools, QA is going to try to test all of the different ways to go through a plot. Depending on how good your tools are, that might be very easy, it might be nearly impossible. KOTOR shipped with a bug that's very difficult to catch. If a specific follower was using stealth in a specific combat, the combat ends with a cutscene where that follower gets taken away. And then later, a lot later, hours later, that follower is supposed to show up for a conversation. But because they are still stealthed, because they didn't leave combat in a standardized way, the perception system can't see them and isn't able to engage in conversation with them. So the game literally hangs at that point hours after the trigger actually occurred. Very difficult to discover that in testing because you needed to do a very specific thing at a very specific moment, quite a long distance ahead of when the symptom of the bug actually occurred. The game was actually broken hours ago, but you didn't realize it was broken until the game attempted to have a conversation with this stealth follower. But typically, if you're encountering a bug, chances are that QA actually did see it, did report it. At least if you are playing a AAA game. Outside of AAA, there is certainly the possibility that the bug was not found. Some projects have no QA people, and the developers are expected to test their content on their own. And that can work, but the personality required to be a good tester isn't necessarily the same as the personality required to be a good developer. And what can end up happening when you do not have dedicated QA is a lot of edge cases fail to be tested. But in a lot of cases, chances are QA actually did see the bug that you're encountering. So why didn't the bug get fixed? There are a variety of reasons why that bug might have been allowed to ship. When I took my computer science degree, there was a quote from somebody that I cannot find anymore that I will paraphrase as, all software is at least one line of code too long and contains at least one bug. If you extend that to the logical conclusion, you can basically reduce all software to one line of code that doesn't work. There is truth in this. All software contains bugs. Games are even more susceptible to this because they contain additionally massive amounts of content and they are interacted with by users that interact with it in non-standard ways. And let's be honest, games are basically shipping their prototypes. If you're making a piece of business software, you are setting the bar in a much higher place than a video game is. This allows games to keep their costs under control, but also it means that you are shipping things under lower standards. So If a bug was found by QA, if it was put into the bug database, why wasn't it fixed? First reason might be because there wasn't a reliable way to reproduce the bug found. Even a really bad bug, even a crash, might be allowed to ship if no way to reproduce it can be found. If you know a bug happens, but you can't reliably reproduce it, your processes to potentially fix that are pretty limited. You are looking at the code and trying to imagine why it might have crashed. You are scrubbing the data to look for things that could cause the crash, but you are basically guessing. And even if you think you fixed it, if it doesn't have reliable reproduction, you're never going to be really sure. What ends up happening is that you try to fix it, you do a few things, but if it's still happening, you are left with basically no choice but to ship it and hope it doesn't affect that many people. But of course, not that many people could still be a lot of people. If you have a bug that happens once every 60 hours for 1% of people, that's a bug with effectively no chance of reproduction. But it means that if you sell 1 million copies of your game, 10,000 people are going to encounter this bug. If that bug is something minor, doesn't really matter. But if that bug is a crash, 10,000 people just crashed. And that's pretty bad. But you are sort of stuck. You're stuck in this situation where because you can't figure out how to reproduce the bug, you're stuck not being able to fix it either. Dragon Age Inquisition had a bug on the PS4 where occasionally it would overwrite a bit of memory and cause a brief squeal to come out of the speakers. This is actually a cert violation because the console manufacturers don't want their consoles ever making very horrible noises. But we could not figure out how to reproduce this. So we pushed some things around, changed the shape of the code, made it happen less often, but it was never fixed. Ultimately, years later on Anthem, the bug in Frostbite was found and fixed. But on Inquisition, it simply was impossible for us to figure out what was happening or how to fix it. So at some point, your game has to ship. And even though you know this bug is there, and even though you know it might be pretty bad, you might be forced to ship it. Video games are incredibly complicated bits of software with a lot of interacting bits that weren't necessarily architected in order to interact effectively. So sometimes you have a bug, but fixing that bug will actually cause another bug in a different place. It's probably better for people's hats to briefly disappear when you walk through this doorway as opposed to the game running out of memory and crashing. And you may have no choice but to choose between those two alternatives. Always when I'm saying no choice, there's always the choice to go back further, re-architect, and fix on a deeper level. But again, your game has to ship eventually. All software contains at least one bug, so you have to decide whether or not it's worth delaying the game to fix that hat disappearing problem that occurs at this one doorway in your game. Similarly, fixing this bug might cause performance to go down because the way to fix it is to allocate more memory or to delay progression of the game until the textures are more streamed in. And you would rather keep your frame rate at 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second than cause a performance impact. Arguably, it's the same issue. You're trading one bug for another. If you fix this bug, you're going to cause the bug of the performance dropping below 30 frames a second to occur. Sometimes a bug is reported and fixed and then regresses. This can happen on games because of that interaction of different systems, especially when there are two systems that are essentially in conflict with each other. Because what will happen is a bug is reported in system A, and you fix that bug, causing a bug in system B. And then a bug on system B gets reported, and you fix that, reintroducing the bug on system A. Depending on how your test process is set up, that reintroduction of the bug might get missed because the testers may have moved on and they may not have the bandwidth to come back and retest that system. Designers, at least the designers I've worked with, are famous for getting it done, doing whatever is required to make the thing they want to happen happen. But one of the ways that they do that often is by exploiting bugs that exist in your code base. So you may find yourself getting close to ship and you find a bug and you know how to fix it, but unfortunately 3 entire plots are relying on that bug to exist in order to work. And now you're left in this horrible situation where you either have to break those 3 plots or you have to let the bug live. And you may decide that the lesser of 2 evils is to let the bug live. And then the last kind of bug that is allowed to escape, I'm going to just call the who gives a shit bug. Let me show you this clip from Baldur's Gate 3.
They already heard how you disgraced yourself before Lady Shah, how she marked you as the enemy. But it is quite another thing for them to see it for themselves. I am very glad you decided to return. A cautionary tale such as yours will be studied by Lady Shah's initiates for years to come.
So, do you see the bug? Viconia is literally hovering above the floor. Was this bug reported by Baldur's Gate 3's testers? I'm going to say probably, not necessarily, but probably. So why wasn't it fixed? And the short answer is kind of who gives a shit. It likely could have been fixed. It's likely that the cinematic systems for Baldur's Gate 3 are capable of fixing this bug. It's possible that they have limitations in their system that made this difficult to fix or impossible to fix, but probably not. The reality is, all pieces of software contain at least one bug, and that's even more true for games. And this is one of those bugs. But the issue with who gives the shit bugs is that one doesn't really matter, but as they start to accumulate, they can start to decrease the overall quality of your game. A crash is bad. One individual little bug, not a big deal. But if your game is covered with this cruft of little minor inconsistencies, little minor bits of failure of polish, it starts to drag the overall quality of your game down. So how do you deal with this? This is the reality of what triage is about, is deciding which of these bugs you allow to ship and which of these bugs you make get fixed. And you want to fix most of them, but you're not going to fix all of them. This is why control the triage, control the project is so true, because each of these little bugs that you choose to fix is ultimately another different little bug that you didn't fix. Each of these little bugs that you fix is the risk of introducing another bug, potentially a worse bug. At the end of the day, games are a compromise between perfection and reality. And you need to find the balance point where you can ship your game in a reasonable time, spending a reasonable amount of money, and still achieving the quality that you're trying to achieve. The reality is when I started in this industry in 1997, the software was pretty loose, pretty scruffy, but games were a lot simpler then as well. And what's essentially happened is that the industry is at best treading water. It is getting better and better at being more rigorous at about the same rate that the complexity of the games themselves is increasing the rate of bug production. The other thing that's happened since I started in the industry is the proliferation of patches. It's a lot easier to let a bug go if you know that you can revisit it in a patch if it proves to be worse than you think it is right now. If you're stuck with it once it launches because there's no way to patch it, because it's hard-coded onto a cartridge, or because patches just simply aren't really a thing yet, then you need to fix the bugs that need to be fixed. Bugs in the 90s were certainly not perfect, but you also needed to work with the assumption that whatever you released was going to be the only thing that ever existed. So it put the bar in a different place. So how did that bug escape? Chances are it was seen by QA, but for some reason, it was deemed that it couldn't be fixed for launch. That might be because it was too hard to fix. That might be because they couldn't find a way to reproduce it reliably. That might be because they decided that it didn't matter that much. It might matter to you, and that's fair, but all games contain at least one bug, and ultimately, shipping games is about deciding when you've gotten enough of the bugs fixed so that you're happy to ship the game. A special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you're interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that down in the description. We also have a Patreon if you are more comfortable supporting the channel in that way. Both Patreons and channel members get access to the Discord, which is a great way to interact with this community to a deeper level. What's a bug that you encountered in a game that was amusing? What's a bug that destroyed your experience of the game forever? Definitely, I played games in the past where I played for hours and hours, and then it crashed and I lost all my progression, and that was basically the end of my experience. Let's talk about it down in the comments. I will see you again soon. Thank you.